If the problem is breathlessness, you need to target the breathing system. And if you target the breathing system, you can actually reduce breathlessness during physical exercise. And the only way to target any system is to add an extra load onto it. But most people do their physical exercise with their mouth open. And if you open mouth breathe, you tend to be upper chest breathing, breathing faster, breathing harder. And you're not adding an extra load onto the diaphragm, so you're not training the breathing system. So when people struggle with breathlessness during physical exercise and wonder, why am I so breathless? And the strength and conditioning coach may say this is poor condition. But I would say this person could have a breathing problem. And if I wanted to reduce their breathlessness, if I target their breathing system, we will make a much direct, quicker impact, even if we just had them sitting on the couch. So that's the thing about it. You know, there's a lot of people that won't do physical exercise because they feel overly breathless during exercise.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Brian Keane. I am very excited for this very long overdue podcast with somebody who's doing tremendous work in the breathwork space, multiple best-selling author, international breath training coach, director of education at the Oxygen Advantage, founder of Myotape, Patrick McKeown. Welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thanks very much, Brian.
We have been trying to organize this for quite a while, and it's been mostly me who was like, we're definitely going to do a podcast at some point. I just need to do a little bit more personal experience and first hands on application to breathwork. I'm now in. I understand it at a personal and experiential level. So I'm very excited for today's podcast. So thanks so much for coming in.
Yeah, great stuff. It's a pleasure.
Let's jump off. There's a lot to get through because breathwork, and you've written multiple books on anxiety-free, stop worrying and quieten the mind, asthma-free naturally, always breathe correctly, the Oxygen Advantage, etc. So this is, and you are one of the world's leading experts on this topic. And I want to start with a general and broad question, and then we'll go deeper and more niche as we go through. What's something about breathwork in general that most people get wrong?
I think with most people, I think they scratch the surface. They don't go deep enough with it. They talk about breathing very often based on tradition with a guru. And it's following one particular mode or technique of breathing. But the application of breathing, it can cross so many different domains, and it's multidimensional when you break it down. But ultimately, all we're working with is the breath in and the breath out. And it's what we do with that. But you can highly stress the body, or you can relax the body, and you can do everything in between. And you can improve your blood circulation, or you can cause your blood vessels to narrow. You can increase oxygen delivery, or you can do the opposite. You can cause such a stress response and put yourself into a panic attack from doing breathing techniques, or you can do the opposite. You can improve your sleep or not. And so I think people often probably don't think about their breathing, and the way breathing has been taught, say for example in yoga. Is that true? Is that correct, the instruction? If you give the cue to people to take a slow, full, deep breath, what is that doing? Could that be perfect for that student, or could it actually do harm? So whenever we're giving a cue on breathing, we have to look at it. If we do one thing here, what impact is it having here? And is it having an intended consequence? But when somebody says about the breath, if you want to bring more oxygen into your body and deliver more oxygen to your tissues to take a full deep breath, it's entirely false. It's the biggest myth in the breath world. And it's really time for people to start thinking about this and just delve into the science and just look at the basic physiology. It's so simple. And yet it has been, so wrong for many decades.
With breathwork, would I be correct in saying that if your outcome is different, you're looking to become anxiety-free versus for performance? I know you've done a lot of work with TJ Reid. TJ's a good friend of mine. I worked with TJ for years. Kilkenny hurler, some consider the best of all time. And other people such as Patrick McKeown, who's been on the podcast, another friend of mine, and I know you helped her for her Everest base camp trip, I think for Kilimanjaro as well. Again, I've got an Everest base camp trip next year, which I'm very excited about. People can check out the link in the description for that. There's still spaces. But would I be correct in saying that depending on your outcome, if you want to become anxiety free, you want to improve your sleep, or you want to improve your performance, the approach you take to breathing and breathwork would be different? Is that accurate to say?
I suppose, when we think about performance, are we talking about physical performance or mental performance?
Very good question. Let's stick with physical for now.
So with physical performance, the sensation of breathlessness during physical exercise is going to contribute to the rate of perceived exertion. And irrespective of the heart rate, if your breathing is really hard and you're struggling with your breathing, that's going to slow you down. Now, the question to ask is, does physical training improve that? If the problem is breathlessness, you need to target the breathing system. And if you target the breathing system, you can actually reduce breathlessness during physical exercise. And the only way to target any system is to add an extra load onto it. But most people do their physical exercise with their mouth open. And if you open mouth breathe, you tend to be upper chest breathing, breathing faster, breathing harder. And you're not adding an extra load onto the diaphragm, so you're not training the breathing system. So when people struggle with breathlessness during physical exercise and wonder, why am I so breathless? And the strength and conditioning coach may say, this is poor condition. But I would say this person could have a breathing problem. And if I wanted to reduce their breathlessness, if I target their breathing system, we will make a much direct, quicker impact, even if we just had them sitting on the couch. See, that's the thing about it. You know, there's a lot of people that won't do physical exercise because they feel overly breathless during exercise. And there's too often a kind of an idea out there that the more physical training you do, that it will reduce your breathlessness. But if you look at even in the literature, you know, there was one paper published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, and they looked at 1,933 athletes. 90% of them had dysfunctional breathing. Now, then you can ask the question, well, how did they assess that? Well, in that instance, they looked at whether they were breathing high or breathing low. Okay, but that's still going to have an impact because high breathing means reduced recruitment of the diaphragm.
When you say high breathing, just for people that are listening, upper chest, and low is stomach?
Better recruitment of the diaphragm.
Okay.
So if you have better recruitment of the diaphragm, then it provides stabilization of the spine. It improves, say, for example, core, and it also, in terms of, it improves movement and reduces the risk of injury. So coming back then to the physical performance aspect, there's so much you can do with breathing because if you look at the primary drivers to breathe, so you need to entangle it. Why and what are the primary drivers to cause an increased sensation of breathlessness during physical exercise? The big one is carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is the primary driver to breathe. And we produce this gas as part of the metabolism. It's a byproduct of metabolism. Carbon dioxide comes back to the heart, back to the lungs. And we expel about 15% of it. So the thing is, though, some people are overly sensitive to the accumulation of this gas, and as a result, they're going to breathe harder and faster. Now, if you do your physical exercise with the mouth open, you're not going to expose yourself to increased CO2 because breathing through the mouth just gets rid of CO2 very easily. But even if you switch to nasal breathing, you're not going to breathe so much when you breathe through your nose. So you're adding an extra load. That in turn will increase carbon dioxide in your lungs and blood. You're now exposing your body to an increased sensation of air hunger.
Air hunger?
Because of the carbon dioxide. So basically, carbon dioxide is the primary driver to breathe. So it mightn't make sense. If somebody is overly breathless, what we actually do is we restrict our breathing to cause adaptations. So we actually even make them more breathless, but we slow down the pace. So we adjust it to add an extra load to cause those adaptations, both from a biochemical point of view, but also from a biomechanical point of view of the diaphragm. So there's about 3 or 4 main drivers to breathe there, even the psychological perception of air hunger. You know, you might have somebody who's had trauma, which of course most people do, genetic predisposition, women with hormonal changes, people with a tendency towards asthma, perfectionist tendencies. So there can be a cohort of people, like 75% of people with anxiety and panic disorder have dysfunctional breathing. So then you could have an athlete who will have perfectionist tendencies, they set high demands on themselves, and as a result then they can increase their sensitivity to the gas carbon dioxide. But also they can have a psychological perception of air hunger that's stronger than another person. So that feeling of breathlessness, how then can you change that? And you can change that also with breathing practice. So from the biochemical dimension, the biomechanical dimension, and the mind-body connection, you can look at all of those 3 things. And if you target those 3 things, then you can reduce the sensation of breathlessness during physical exercise. So you can then get an individual to do their physical exercise and they don't have to breathe so hard and so fast to attain that physical exercise. They've more reserve. They don't gas out so quick. They've got a better recovery. Like we've seen it as well with heart rate variability with people doing ultramarathons. And we've seen them when they've done it with their mouth open. And then when they've practiced changing their breathing patterns. And then breathing through their nose during an ultramarathon. And comparing the HRV. And it's markedly different. So, you know, this is quite new still in sports. Like the field is new. Okay, we've been in it 23 years, but now it's starting to break some ground. And I think people are going to, because when you think about it, it just makes sense, you know. If it's a breathing problem, you need to target the breathing problem. You don't improve your breathing by doing physical exercise. The only exception was swimming. And swimming was traditionally often, you know, if a child had asthma, doctor years ago used to say, go and swim. And of course, when you're swimming, you're breathing against resistance because the body is on the water. And because the body is on the water, you're breathing against the pressure of the water against the chest. And as a result, then you can impose a resistance to the biomechanical aspect, the muscle component. But you also have your head in the water during swimming. So as a result, you don't breathe as less. So the way to improve your breathing patterns, add the load to your breathing. Every athlete knows that. But how do you add the load to it?
Do you do it during the physical exercise then, or is this like a meditative practice where you practice your breathing and then you take that and bring it into your training, or is this something that you do always in the middle of the exercise, whether it's CrossFit, running, etc.?
You can do both. How you breathe during physical exercise is going to be influenced by how you breathe outside of it. So if one has poor breathing patterns during their normal everyday to-day activity, say for example somebody who's breathing a little bit faster.
Can you spot that in somebody?
Oh, we'd spot it.
Yeah.
I would spot it straight away because you're working with it and you observe it. Now there are screening tools as well, like the Bolt score that we use with Oxygen Advantage or the control pause with the Buteyko technique. So one professor of physical therapy, Keane, he got 51 individuals and he looked at their breathing from a biochemical, a biomechanical and a psychophysiological point of view. And he concluded that their breath hold time, the Bolt score, is a good indicator of whether that person is breathing functionally or not. So even I as an instructor, yes, I'm observing people breathe, you pick up on it of course, but we also have screening tools. And a very simple screening tool that anybody could try is the Bolt score. And it's simply
BOLT?
BOLT. So we call it body oxygen level test. Now, it's not really measuring oxygen. It's actually measuring, or it's giving you some feedback of your chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide buildup. But your ability to hold your breath isn't just influenced by the carbon dioxide. When you stop breathing, your lungs, stretch receptors in the lungs have sensed that you've stopped breathing. And there's going to be a signal to the brain. And if you've got a slight fear response towards air hunger, the amygdala can kick in. So it's kind of an interesting one because your ability to hold your breath is not just influenced by the biochemical, but it's also influenced by the mind-body connection. But at the same time, like Keane, he concluded that if your Bolt score is above 25 seconds, there is an 89% chance that your breathing is functional. Now, if you have somebody with a low Bolt score, and say their Bolt score is 10 seconds, if that person is sitting there, you will see their breathing to be a little bit faster. It's going to be a little bit more upper chest. They might feel that they're not getting enough air. They may have their mouth open to try and compensate. They may be stopping breathing, or they may have sighing. And they're all the patterns of dysfunctional breathing. Now, that pattern isn't going to fix itself automatically during sports. And if anything, it's going to get worse. So, because you have the amplification of respiration, like during physical exercise, you could be breathing 50 breaths per minute. And each breath, you might be drawing in 2 or 3 litres of air into your lungs. So that's what the human lungs is capable of handling. Between 100 to 150 or even 200 litres of air per minute during physical exercise. Where during rest, we're looking for about 6 to 8. So the human body, like this is an enormous capability to go from 6 to 8 litres up to maybe 150, 200 litres in a very short space of time. And that's why we have to think of the breathing system and not just think about the diaphragm, but to think about the different components that all come into it. So coming back to your question, we use about 25 different breathing exercises. Now, I can give you an overview of breathing in 1 minute that will actually kind of tease out a lot of it. Breathing in essence is very, very simple. People complicate it. There's nothing complicated about respiration. You breathe in, you breathe out. Okay, so that's what you're working with. If you breathe faster, so you speed up the respiratory rate, it's a stressor. So your body is telling the brain that there's a threat. So you're actively changing your breathing patterns to communicate that to the brain. But you also have a structure in the brain, the pre-Botzinger complex, which is monitoring your breathing. So your brain knows moment to moment how you are breathing, and your brain is weighing up, are you under threat or are you safe? Now it's important to know that because we can then use that to our advantage. So if you breathe faster intentionally, as in a breathing practice, it's a stressor. If you breathe faster and harder, you're amplifying the stress response. If you breathe light, so you're really soft in the breath, that you're not taking much air into your lungs, so that you reduce the volume of air that you are breathing. In general, that's activating the relaxation response. If you breathe slow, with normal tidal volume, not slow with full breaths. Because if you breathe slow, but you increase the volume of air that you're bringing in so much, you get rid of too much carbon dioxide. That increases blood pH, and that in turn is going to cause arousal of the brain. So even though people will generally say, if I slow breathe, it causes me to calm down. No, it's not just about the respiratory rate. You could slow down your breathing from 20 breaths per minute down to 6 breaths, but you might increase the tidal volume, the volume of air that you're bringing into your lungs so much.
Is that the deeper breath?
Correct. That you end up over-breathing. But over-breathing is reducing blood flow to the brain, is reducing oxygen delivery, is driving up blood pH, and is increasing brain cell excitability. And like the whole area now in terms of anxiety and the default mode network, we can really influence that, whether nose breathing versus mouth breathing, light breathing versus hard breathing. So coming back again, so what else can you do with the breath? Well, you could breathe in and you can hold your breath. You can hold your breath for a short period of time, might be 5 seconds, and that typically is a relaxer, but it could be a stressor either. Or you can breathe in and hold your breath for a long period of time. Or you can breathe in, breathe out and hold your breath for a short period of time, which is a relaxer. Or you breathe in, breathe out, you hold your breath for a long period of time, it's a stressor. That's all we have with the breath. Every breathing technique in the world is going to either breathe faster, slower, harder, lighter, breath hold after inhalation, or a breath hold after exhalation. And then the only things you think about is it nose, is it mouth, is it chest, is it diaphragm? That's it. So you think of all of the gurus out there in the breathing world that are teaching this, and yet that's all we're working with. And I'm not a guru, by the way, and I'm just going to say that for the outset.
I agree to disagree. I would consider you a guru in this space for sure. I want to ask a question. I'm hoping people listening are thinking something similar. I experiment a lot with breath work, and what I'm hearing you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we wanted to get more energy, i.e. before a workout, before a podcast, before a date, whatever it is, we're going to breathe fast. And if we want to calm and relax, we're predominantly going to breathe slow, and then everything falls within the modalities around that. Would that be a correct summation of fast breathing versus slow breathing?
Yeah, in general. Now, I'd probably take a step back. Say, for example, if somebody is waking up and they're feeling pretty lousy in the morning, I wouldn't ask them to upregulate. In that instance, I would ask them actually to downregulate.
So slower breathing.
I would. And the only reason being is because there's a reason that they haven't had the quality of sleep. Or maybe it's not, they might have had 8 hours in bed, but it doesn't mean that they've 8 hours of quality sleep. Mm-hmm. So they may have an undiagnosed sleep issue. They may be snoring. They may be having sleep apnea, etc., or insomnia. So that person then waking up and they're feeling very sluggish, what I would say to them is, listen to a guided audio for 20 minutes. And it's almost like a rest and reset. And it really gives you that catch-up period, because like I do it if I'm jet lag and my time is all over the place. And if I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, I actually throw on a set of headphones and I listen to a guided audio. Now, they're my own ones, but I listen to them because I want to kind of snatch a period of deep rest. And I want to be able to re-energize that I'm coming in then. So it's never just about you're feeling sluggish, upregulate. Now, say, for example, somebody wakes up and they're feeling they want to upregulate. I would say the best thing to do in the morning, this is all I do, and I'm not an athlete. I do my own physical exercise a little every morning. I'll get onto an elliptical. I'll do a half an hour with my mouth closed. I will pay attention to my breathing.
All nose.
All nose. Absolutely all nose. I do wear a nasal dilator because I have a deviated septum just to help open up the nostrils or the nasal airway so I can take more air in. But I use that to upregulate. And when I'm on the elliptical as well, I'm paying attention to my breathing. And if I'm feeling tired, I'll actually do my eyes closed. And the thing about the elliptical is you're holding on anyway, so you're not going to fall off. So I always because I suppose I don't have time. And most people listening are not going to have time. I don't have time for formal breath work. I don't have time for physical exercise, for breathing, for meditation. But what I have time is, I set an hour aside for me every morning. And a lot of the time I didn't do that, Brian. I got so caught up with work. I would wake up early. Like the Oxygen Advantage was written between the hours of 4 a.m. and 8 a.m. And then I would do my full day's work, teaching breathing. And I had to because, I had no time to write it. And then I kind of got resentful with that. So for me, anything breathing related is the tools that you can bring into your everyday life. And I will genuinely say I'm working with these tools half my life. They are absolutely a game changer. And the thing about it is, once you learn them, you have them for life. And they're free. And there's no other function in health that will make such a profound impact. Like if you think we can influence sleep health in a big way. We can influence respiration. We can influence mental health. We can influence dental health. We can influence sports. And I can't think of any other function. Diet doesn't have the same impact. Physical exercise doesn't have the same impact. Meditation doesn't have the same impact. But yet how you breathe, how you sleep is going to influence your diet. Like if you have lousy sleep, you're tired. You're going to be reaching for quick fixes and for high energy foods and carbohydrates and sugars to get that energy. But the problem's going back to sleep. So coming back to your question, like, you know, what gets a lot of attention in terms of breath work and what does breath work mean to different people? What gets the attention is the stuff that you see, you know, the hyperventilation, and everybody is all of this euphoria. And of course that has a purpose, and it's a release of emotions and a release of trauma, and people really feel good. But what about the normal everyday stuff? You know, I'll give you an example. I was going into the BBC to do an interview with them, and I was in the green room from 12 o'clock that day. And I was sitting in the green room from 12 o'clock right up to 5 p.m. Now, you're going into a studio with cameras and you're sitting there for 5 to 6 hours and there's an air of anticipation. I was brought to the studio door, just standing outside the door, waiting for the door to open, and I was standing there for about 5-6 minutes, maybe 7 minutes. I'm not sure, but it felt a long time. I started to notice my heart rate was pumping. And okay, I don't want to go into this room in a fight or flight response. Because at that point there, all my brain cares about is survival. And all my brain wants to do is get me out of there. And it's not going to be a time for creativity. It's not going to be a time for good articulation or getting my ideas out there, because that's not what my brain wants to do. My brain has interpreted that I have now gone into a fight or flight response. So I stood there. Now, cameras were on me outside the door. And one of the producers or whoever said, "Patrick, take a deep breath." And I turned around to him and says, "No, I'm not taking any deep breaths." And they told me to do it because it looked good for them. It would look good. Here I am stressed outside the door. So he obviously sensed it. But I could feel my heart rate. So I just stood there and I took a soft breath in through my nose and a really relaxed, slow, gentle breath out. I didn't time it. All I did was slow down my breathing relative to how I was breathing. I brought down my heart rate. I put the critical mind aside and I walked into that room and I was ready to go through a brick wall. Now, they are tools, and I knew, of course, I have the tool, and it's a tool that you start off in small situations, but it gives you a tremendous capacity then when you're going into a challenging situation, that you're going into this and you feel a comfort in knowing if your physiology does, because we are human, of course. And there's a time that, especially in an instance like that, when you feel a pressure to perform, and of course that pressure to perform is going to hamper the very thing that you want to do, but being able to self-regulate. Now, there was nothing for anybody to see there. But that's the beauty of it. We should always, having those tools, because it's not just that I can use them for myself going into a situation. I don't want to give the game away. But also, you shouldn't give the game away. In other words, how many people going into a challenging situation, and if you pick up in their breathing, you will know straight off if they're uncomfortable. An employee going into the boss to ask for a raise, or the boss having a word with the employee. You know, we all weigh up each other unconsciously through the breath. Don't give yourself away.
I love that. That crosses over into so many areas and scenarios. Like, people are listening, and although it's the example of BBC and having an interview, people have that before dates. They have that before potentially talking to a difficult parent or a dysfunctional family member or anything that's work related. So those tools are so helpful for people. It's interesting you mentioned there about the Oxygen Advantage, writing it between 4 and 8. We'll do a separate talk for the circle for the group business coaching members, which will go through a lot more of the business side of things. I'm excited for that. And again, it's just sometimes you just have to go and get after it. And we were talking right before we went on air that you need seasons of life where times when you're like, actually it's go mode, and having these tools allows you to show up the way you need to show up, whether it's before a podcast, before an interview, before a meeting, etc. And then there's times when you need to be completely regulated and just disconnect, say no, and just be in the moment for an extended period of time. And it's just knowing to flick that switch, which kind of ties me on to the next area which you talked about there, about the default mode network. Anxiety is a big thing. This is something that thankfully over the past decade or so I've done a lot of work on. I used to get anxiety attacks, I used to get panic attacks, and again, you mentioned there about the shallow breathing. It would be that's how my breath was when I would have a panic attack. but I've done a lot of work over the years, arming myself with different tools to move through anxiety, everything from somatic therapy all the way up to cognitive behavioral therapy and everything in between. But for me, coming back to the breath was the thing that helped the most. Even before I had all these tools, just breathing into it, because when you're having an anxiety attack, all you can focus on is the fact that I can't breathe, and your brain is just like, I can't breathe, and you're panicking, and it makes it worse. It becomes this negative feedback loop of I can't breathe, panic, and it makes it worse. With anxiety and the default mode network, for those who are listening who are like, I still have that, where my brain runs away with me. I tried journaling, I've tried therapy, I've tried cognitive behavioral therapy, all these tools that are amazing and potentially great modalities to help people get from 0 to 1, bring awareness to their thoughts, see what's going on with any in-body somatic trauma that might be stuck there that they need to release. But ultimately, your breath will either prime you to go deeper with that or help you when you're having that anxiety or that narrative play in your mind that, oh my God, what would happen? What will go wrong? Anxiety is just your mind feeling like it's running away with you. What would be the process before we come on to sleep? Because we've got the new book here, The Breathing Cure for Better Sleep. But I want to park on anxiety first, because I always think anxiety and sleep are very closely connected. It's very difficult to sleep when you're anxious. Talk to us a little bit about using breathing, or what people need to know either about the default mode network or anxiety in general, and how breath can potentially either serve as a tool to manage through it or a prevention versus cure.
Okay, so the human mind, wonderful part.
Very easy topic. Yeah, no problem. We'll unpack this in 20 minutes. Easy.
But I suppose we can break it down, We either are paying attention or we're not. So if we're paying attention, we're paying attention to our senses, through our sight, through our sound, through our smell, taste, feel. So that's how we communicate with life, when we have our attention on something. Or the opposite to that is we're stuck in our head. And when we're stuck in our head, that's typically the default mode network. So scientists originally thought that, when they were doing fMRI scanning, they'd have an individual in the chamber, and they would be only monitoring how was their brain activity when they were doing a particular task. And then they started noticing, well, these individuals are in the chamber, but they're not actually doing anything, but there's different parts of the brain lighting up. And one part is the front part and the 2 horns around the ears and the midline. And then they were asking, okay, well, this center is a connection of different parts of the brain. And are they in synchrony with each other? Or are they amplified? So are they able to settle down, or are they revved up? Okay, so if, for example, I was an overthinker for many years, I think our education system has a big role to play in causing anxiety. And I would say that very simply. We are trained how to think. We are trained how to analyze. We're trained how to break information into tiny pieces. We're trained how to use the mind, but we're not actually trained how to stop thinking. We're not trained how to direct our attention on what we want to train it. So say, for example, the likes of rumination of the mind. And this, by the way, is not anything about the school teachers, because school teachers just have to follow a system.
Yeah, it's the system that's the problem, not the individuals within the
Absolutely.
system. Yeah, I was a teacher for years, and I speak firsthand to that. It's the system that's the problem, not the individuals within it.
Because the system was something that was maybe during the Industrial Revolution, and it hasn't moved on, and it's not giving young people the tools to put them out into life, whether it's for the workforce or whether it's for other aspects of life, which are all very, very important. But coming back to rumination of the mind, we have a tendency to be stuck in our heads. Now, it's known that we spend about 50% of our time stuck in our heads. Now, the thing about being stuck in our head is that if we're stuck in our head, we're not related to life. We're not paying attention. And you can't really do any quality of work, or even you can't even be attentive to another person if you're stuck in your head. So we need to train that. Now, then you might ask, well, what are the factors that contribute to rumination of the mind? Poor sleep quality is a massive one. It doesn't get attention. If you look at people with depression, they need to do a sleep study. And the only reason I'll say that is because there's a marked link between depression and obstructive sleep apnea. Now, obstructive sleep apnea is when an individual, I know you didn't want to you wanted me to wait for a while, but I'll just kind of touch on it.
They're connected. They're heavily connected.
Massive. Yeah. You cannot disengage them. So obstructive sleep apnea would be when you're stopping breathing during sleep, or your airway is partially collapsing and there's a reduction of airflow so that you're not getting enough oxygen. Now, of course, your brain is highly oxygen dependent. The brain needs 20% of the oxygen coming into the body. So for its weight, it consumes 10 times more oxygen than any other organ in the human body. It's so reliant on oxygen. Now, if during sleep, the brain senses that this individual is reduced the volume of air that they are breathing because their airway is collapsing, their throat is collapsing. The brain then is going to take them out of deep sleep. So the problem with that then is if we're not getting an adequate deep sleep, the brain isn't cleaning itself. We're spending more time in light sleep and we're going to wake up feeling lousy even though we've had 8 hours of sleep. Okay, so let's look at sleep in terms of rumination. Poor sleep quality, poor sleep quantity is going to feed into rumination of the mind. There is no way you can have good sleep. There's no way that you can have a quiet and a calm mind and an ability to hold your attention if you have a sleep disorder. Okay, so when people are doing mindfulness, I always want to know, is mindfulness going to work for the very person who needs it the most? And I will say it won't. And the reason being is because if I have lousy sleep, and I'll notice, as anybody will, that your mind tends to be a little bit more agitated that day. And if somebody then says, well, go and do mindfulness. Well, the problem isn't having to pay attention. The problem here is my sleep is the problem. Okay, so that's one aspect of it. Another factor that feeds into rumination of the mind is how you breathe. There is such an intricate connection between the mind and the breath. If you breathe fast, if you breathe shallow, if you breathe irregular, if you breathe hard, you are telling your brain that you're stressed. Your brain automatically is going into this fight or flight response. Now, they have looked in terms of nose versus mouth breathing. So in one study in terms of the default mode network, so this is the part of the brain that's active when you're idle. The part of the brain that's active when you're daydreaming or ruminating. If you breathe through your mouth, you've got a heightened response in the default mode network. Now, chronic mouth breathing is so common out there. It's between 30 and 60% of children. Nobody pays any attention to it.
As in they're breathing primarily through their mouth versus their nose?
Yes, and there's no definition of what constitutes mouth breathing. So, but one, say, for example, mouth breathing would be when you're resting with your mouth wide open, and not just wide open mouth, but breathing through the mouth, doing your physical exercise with your mouth open, which is about 93% of individuals who do physical exercise. And
we don't want that as a majority. Is that, would I be correct in saying that?
That's another conversation.
I know I've gone down a rabbit hole now, but continue that talk. We'll
come back to that.
Yeah.
And then sleep is about 50%. So you might say that you're a nose breather, but are you a nose breather? Like I had a woman last night on a call. We were doing the webinar. And she told me she's absolutely a nasal breather. And I was just looking at her afterwards and she was sitting there listening to me with her mouth open. So oftentimes people feel they are a nasal breather, but they're not always aware if whether they are breathing through their nose or mouth. So I would say, if you want to reduce rumination of the mind, start breathing through your nose. I know it is so simple. Look at the research. When you breathe through your nose, there is something happening in terms of a default mode network. That rumination is quietening just by nasal breathing alone. Okay. Now we have another aspect. If, for example, we are breathing a little bit too hard and too fast, and one psychiatrist has written about this in terms of neuronal excitability. So we have 80 billion brain cells. Each one is communicating with 15,000 other brain cells. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the brain. But how we breathe is going to influence the excitability of these brain cells. If you have a respiratory rate over 15 breaths per minute, that is a marker for heightened neuronal excitability. And if you have brain cells that are overly excitable, that too can contribute to rumination of the mind. So there's many factors that feed into rumination of the mind. And while most of the emphasis is on looking at somebody and telling them to do mindfulness, and I know myself, like I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people with panic disorder and anxiety, and I've asked them, have you tried mindfulness? A small proportion do. Have you sticked with it? Did you stay with it? No, I didn't. Why didn't? Because I felt I was getting nowhere. And of course you're going to get nowhere. If you have a dysfunctional breathing pattern and a poor sleep, we're asking somebody to be achieving something in terms of a quietness of a mind and giving them an expectation that if you do this, you're going to quieten your mind. But we're not also addressing the very underlying factors, the principles that are feeding into it. And, this is everywhere. Psychotherapists are teaching cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't change underlying respiratory physiology. So you spoke about panic disorder. Now, anybody who is prone to, say, panic disorder, they will know that the traditional recommendation there was to breathe in and out of a brown paper bag. Okay, so why was that? Because during the panic attack, they are breathing too hard and too fast. They are over-breathing. And as a result, they are getting rid of too much carbon dioxide from their lungs. And carbon dioxide isn't just a waste gas. We only breathe out 15%. We hold on to 85%. And if we are breathing too much, by breathing too fast and too hard, and we're getting rid of too much carbon dioxide, we lower the carbon dioxide in the lungs. You can lower the carbon dioxide in the lungs by half within about 30 to 60 seconds of overbreathing. That's all it takes. Now, if you lower the carbon dioxide in the lungs, you're going to lower carbon dioxide in the blood leaving the lungs. And as a result then, the blood vessels are going to constrict. You can have a 10 to 20% restriction or narrowing of blood circulation in 1 minute from overbreathing. And that's 1 minute. That's to the brain. Now then the brain is going to get excited because the brain isn't getting enough blood flow. The brain isn't getting enough oxygen. And the brain is going to drive breathing. And the amygdala might have kicked in as well, depending on the individual. So now you have this perpetuating cycle of hyperventilation. You're told to get a brown paper bag. Breathe in and out of the brown paper bag. Now, the purpose of that, of course, is the brown paper bag is cupping and pooling carbon dioxide. You breathe out carbon dioxide from your lungs into the bag, and then on the breath in, you're bringing that carbon dioxide richer air into your lungs. This increases the carbon dioxide in the lungs, which in turn increases carbon dioxide in the blood leaving the lungs, which in turn increases blood flow to the brain, which in turn, with the increase of carbon dioxide, it lowers blood pH and it increases oxygen delivery to the brain. But the other aspect is the lowering of blood pH due to the accumulation of carbon dioxide helps to reduce brain cell excitability. Now, okay, the problem isn't how the person was breathing during the panic attack. The problem is their everyday breathing, because 75% of that cohort have dysfunctional breathing. They can be having poor breathing from a biomechanical point of view, and probably more so from a biochemical point of view, but also a psychophysiological, the mind-body connection. Because, see, the thing about breathing is personal for every single one of us. We all breathe differently because our breathing is so susceptible to influences from so many different things. Genetics, the environment that we're in, our mind, whether we have a tendency towards asthma, females when they go through hormonal changes as part of the monthly cycle, the foods that we eat, the lack of exercise, talking, for example. People who talk for a living, they're often exhausted at the end of the day talking. They may never have equated their exhaustion to their breathing. So we all breathe differently. And I would love to see today that a psychotherapist isn't just going to give cognitive behavioral therapy to their clients. Because again, and the mindfulness teacher and the yoga instructor, because breathing is playing a fundamental part of helping that person to reduce rumination of the mind. And CBT alongside breathing re-education. And there has been papers on this. We have just spent 2 years writing a new course called Physiological Breath Training. I provided the breathing component of it, and 4 psychotherapists and psychologists, including PhDs, brought together with the mind. So, in terms of the whole aspect of it there, that you could apply both. You as a psychotherapist or somebody in mental health, yes, teach CBT, but also assess your client's breathing patterns and work on that. Like one paper was by Alicia Moret. She looked at 51 individuals with agoraphobia and panic disorder. She compared them with CBT versus breathing re-education. Now with the breathing, she had them breathe less. So she actually had them breathe less air to expose them to carbon dioxide, increase carbon dioxide in the lungs and blood. This creates a sensation of air hunger. Okay, so there's a slight psychological stress, but at the same time, the exposure to the increased CO2 helps to reduce the sensitivity to carbon dioxide. So she's helping to improve their underlying breathing patterns by having them breathe less air to train their brain so that they don't have to breathe so fast and so hard in their normal everyday life. And that's part of the biochemical dimension of breathing. So she looked at the results. Breathing training with reduced volume breathing had the same result as CBT. Same result, but through a different mechanism. Why not do the two together? And the thing about this is you are giving people the tools for life. It's free.
What I love about that, as somebody that's a big fan of CBT, but I always found CBT, when you're working on rumination and anxiety, if you're trying to put out a fire, CBT feels like putting out a fire with more fire, that you're using your analytical mind to deal with an analytical problem, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. That can work for a lot of people, but there's a limitation. It's to the world, to the man with the hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. You can't use the same thing all the time. And for those that are dealing with anxiety or mental health issues, and again, I'm speaking first-hand experience here, I felt like I hit a glass ceiling with the analytical approach. That CBT was great, reading Stoic philosophy, negative visualization, all of these things were phenomenal and really helped, but they never served as a tipping point until I got into the somatic side and feeling into my body, feeling into my breath, learning to breathe correctly. And it was as if there was an unlock when I combined the two. And it's not a coincidence that you're saying there, why not use both, particularly breath work, because it's free. It's just knowing how. And what I love about what you do, and the last topic we're going to talk on is sleep. You educate people, Patrick, whether it's the 13,000 instructors that you've qualified over the years, or what you're doing with books and podcasts and social media and the products that you have. And I'll talk about Myotape now in a moment as well. It's educating people. It's showing them, look, you have this resource available. You just need to learn how to use it. It's like having this amazing supercomputer that you actually don't have the access codes for. Yes. That's what your body's like. You've got this body that's breathing by itself, but you need to learn how to tap into it more effectively, more efficiently, and make it work for you.
Yes. And can I just make a point as well? People, when they think about breath work, they will often think about the hyperventilation and the breath holding. And I kind of spoke with that. But don't just think about that way. Make it accessible for yourself. Sometimes people mightn't feel comfortable initially bringing attention to their breath. And you kind of touched on that. Go for a walk with your mouth closed. Go for a jog with your mouth closed. Or listen to a guided audio, or do short breath holds. Hum. There's a lot of things you can do with breathing that you can tailor it to you. And it is a tremendous. Now, at the same time, training attention is also very important. The tendency for the mind to wander, of course, that's what the mind does. But paying attention, say, to your breath, or bringing attention into the body or into present moment awareness, and go very easy on yourself. Don't just set an expectation that you're here and you want to be there, that you're in the present, but you want to get to the future. Because even if you just have 5 seconds on your breath, and then you notice your mind wandering, and whenever your mind wanders, you bring your attention back. I came across that luckily back in the 1998. I have to say, Brian, it has made life a hell of a lot softer. And not only is it softer, you're more productive. You're more creative, you're more intuitive, you're happier. The human mind has such a tendency to wander, and human beings have been trying to figure this one out for thousands of years. You could look at all of the essences of religion. The foundation of religion was to help to bring a quietness to the mind. And yet we still haven't figured it out. But if we want to bring a quietness to the mind, we don't solve it by thinking. You spoke about that. So we need to get out of our heads. Okay, you could go down to Buskers downstairs and you could have 10 pints of Guinness. You're out of your head, but you're going to suffer the next day as a result of it. So there's a different way to get out of our head, directing our attention onto something. And to go easy with yourself, but don't just direct your attention on something. The simple practice that got me into breathing was one hand on my chest, one hand just above my navel. Taking the softest of a breath into my nose, under breathing. So not taking the normal breath in, taking in maybe about 70% of that breath in, nice and soft and slow, and then having a slow, relaxed and gentle breath out. Breathing less air, because as I was breathing less air, of course then I'm increasing blood flow to the brain. So I'm calming the default mode network. That also allows me to have more attention on my breathing, and there's less of a tendency for the mind to wander. But at the same time, by practicing that technique, I'm improving my underlying breathing patterns. Now, another aspect of it is I'm surrendering to a sensation of suffocation. Now, I would say to people, if you do have an exaggerated alarm to suffocation, especially if you have a tendency towards panic disorder, only do it for about 15 to 30 seconds. And go easy and dip your toes into the water and just see how your body responds. You want to have a sensation of air hunger, which signifies that carbon dioxide is increasing in your lungs and blood. And check in, your body will tell you whether the suffocation feeling is outweighing the relaxation or whether the relaxation is outweighing the suffocation. Check in on the saliva in the mouth. So normally with most people, you will notice that they have increased water saliva in the mouth within 1 to 2 minutes of practicing it. Now your body is ready for the digestion of food. You're feeling sleepy. So in terms of the autonomic nervous system, you can directly target that within about 1 to 2 minutes to dampen the stress response and increase relaxation. Now say, for example, you have somebody prone to panic disorder and they're practicing it and they're breathing less air and it's making them totally panic. This is a tremendous realization for that person, because that person has a really strong alarm to suffocation that needs to be trained. So they need to desensitize their body's reaction to that, because If, for example, they get into an uncomfortable situation and next thing is they're feeling air hunger and that sets off a panic attack, that's too bad. That's too much at that point. So we need to kind of look at the everyday breathing pattern. So when we're talking about, attention, there's a massive role for meditation. But don't just do meditation. And normally in meditation, which was, if you look at Vipassana, SN Goenka, and the instruction there is don't change your breathing patterns. But that has originated from Buddhism. That's 2,500 or whatever amount of years. Life was so different back then. Nowadays, we do have to change our breathing.
Didn't have his Instagram notifications turned on.
Well, I would show you my phone. I have no social media apps on my phone. And I would say to everybody, get rid of them, honestly. Now, I'm lucky I have staff that work, but they finish at 5 o'clock and that's it. That is a big, big issue coming down the tracks. You know it. Everybody knows it. That's a train crash going to happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's scary. Holly's over there, my daughter's in the corner of the room, and navigating social media over the next few years, and just your brain constantly getting these cheap dopamine hits, and that makes everything else more difficult. I just want to add before we get into the Myotape and the sleep, meditation. I always think of meditation for your mind like exercises for your body, and breath work for me. And it took me a while to get here, Patrick, but thankfully I've been following your stuff for years and just couldn't quite grasp it until maybe 6 months ago. It felt like an amalgamation and a merging of both, because I was always very good with the physical side, the exercise, moving my body, etc. That helps with my sleep, my mood, food, etc. And then the meditation, like you mentioned earlier, you learn to bring your mind back, like it's a Labrador, that you're training a little puppy Labrador, and just bringing your mind back to the present moment, bringing it back. And then the breath work is like an in-between, because you're physically using your body, you're physically using your breath, but you also have the tool that meditation gave you. So if there's someone listening who was similar to me of 2 years ago, where you're like, I know breath work works and it's good and it's like everything Patrick has said is amazing, but I can't get it, just ease into it and know that you'll find it when you're meant to. And sometimes you need to pull from other skill sets, i.e. your breathing when you work out, or the pulling your mind back when you meditate, and that can actually support your breath work as well. So I just want to, because there's people at all different layers or lines of the spectrum in terms of how advanced they are with their breathing or their breath work, all the way down to complete beginners. So just, I want to add that as somebody who took a while to get into the space and has seen massive benefit. Last thing I want to touch on before we move on to the premium content for the Circle members and those watching on YouTube. Brian Keane Fitness, the full videos on YouTube. We have all the products and books and everything here in front of us. Talk to us about Myotape and sleep, because if I'm not mistaken, Carolyn McKenna, who I'm really good friends with, has been on the podcast a couple of times as well. She's a big fan of this, amongst several others. Talk about how people use this and the reason for Myotape in particular when it comes to sleep.
Back in 1998, I was fortunate enough, I came across an article in the Irish Times, or the Irish Independent. I thought it was written by Sylvia Thompson. She talked about the work of a Ukrainian doctor, Konstantin Buteyko. He said two things. He said, only breathe in and out through your nose, and he said, breathe less air. I was a mouth breather at that time. Now, I was after doing a course in Trinity BSS. I was in the corporate world. I was highly stressed. And it wasn't just that the corporation was putting stress on me, which it was. I just didn't have the tools to deal with the pressure. I had poor sleep and I had poor breathing. But I remember reading that, and I think I came across a similar article again. It took me a couple of times to kind of catch on to it. And I said, I don't do either of those things. I'm a chronic mouth breather because my nose congestion, and I'm an upper chest faster breather. And I then did the nose unblocking exercise, and actually worked. And I said, okay, there's really something in this. I breathed less air, and the temperature of my hands increased. And I felt that there was a calmness coming in, even with the air hunger. I really stuck with it, because this was the first time that I had some control over my nasal congestion, like I'd always cold hands and feet, as I was saying. So that night then, I wore a nasal dilator that I got from the chemist, and I taped up my mouth with not with Myotape, but 3M 1-inch micropore tape. And the next morning I woke up, and I don't remember anything different, but I did it again, and I kept nasal breathing the second day. And I woke up the second morning, and my concentration was unbelievable. I actually was waking up feeling refreshed. I have never stopped taping since. Now, I then was teaching my clients. I trained then in Russia, and I started teaching this full-time in 2002. Every client came in through my door whether it was a child or whether it was an adult. Now with children, it was older kids, and we had to establish that they could breathe through their nose, like putting in the safety mechanisms there, starting off changing the behavior of nose breathing during the day, switching to nasal breathing, and then bringing in getting the mouth closed during sleep. It is night and day. If you wake up with a dry mouth in the morning, it's a sign that you have been breathing through an open mouth. Your sleep is going to be much lighter. You're more prone to snoring. You're more prone to obstructive sleep apnea. You're more prone to increased sympathetic drive and insomnia. So all of the sleep conditions are made worse by mouth breathing versus nasal breathing. We don't want to force nasal breathing. It's not about that. It's about making the training your breathing patterns, but also using a support. So anyway, people said to me, Patrick, you need to bring out a tape. And I was saying, well, why would I bring out a tape? Sure, 3M 1-inch micropore tape. I can buy it down in the chemist for €3. Like, why would I bother? But then we always had an issue with children. I can't tape children's mouths, but at the same time, I need children breathing through their nose because there's a huge dental or implication and sleep and academic. Brain development in a child is impacted if the child is snoring or having sleep apnea or having mouth breathing. Children, and I don't want to go off topic, but Karen Bonnock did a study of 11,049 children in the UK. She looked at these children from age 6 months to 57 months, and she concluded if these kids have untreated sleep disorders at age 5, they have a 40% increased risk of special education needs by age 8 within 3 years. Now, if we're thinking about the huge incidence of special education needs in children, and is anybody looking at these kids' sleep? Is anybody looking at these kids' breathing? Because the brain develops in childhood during deep sleep. But if that child is having and struggling with their breathing, they're not getting adequate deep sleep, they're not getting adequate brain development, and then these kids are sent into school to study without having the tools. So coming back, how could I fix then getting the children with their mouth closed? So that's when the idea of Myotape. I was initially using the paper tape around the mouth, pulling it together, and then I decided using with kinesio tape. So I started cutting strips of kinesio tape, working with my clients, and then I have 2 nephews, and I went out with a ruler and I measured their mouths, and then I measured and kind of designed it, and then I designed it then for adults, and I tested many tapes. I got a hospital grade factory to produce it. That was about 4 years ago. We've now sold about 12 or 14 million strips. It's been massive.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's been massive. Now there's a patent on it, both a utility and design patent worldwide. It was something that was so simple. We didn't want to cover the mouth because there was too much of a risk. It was a tape just simply worn around the mouth and stretched with an elastic tension to pull the lips together to ensure nasal breathing, but at the same time, if there was an emergency, which can happen in sleep apnea, the person can mouth puff. You can't, if you have somebody with obstructive sleep apnea, you can't just tape their mouth. Now, I know there's different tapes out there, but those tapes are not coming from the background. My background was working with breathing for 23 years. At that time, I was working with breathing for 19 years. I have seen the pitfalls, and I didn't want to go there. So that's why I wanted to have a product which was markedly different. And it is the only product like that.
Amazing. Patrick, I'm going to link that in the description for people below, because the Myotape is something that potentially could change people's lives in so many ways, because the problem with sleep and breathing is you don't have control of it, as opposed to your breath work during the day. When you're conscious, you're literally unconscious when you sleep. So I'll put the link in the description below. I'm also going to link the Instagram pages, the Oxygen Advantage, etc., and all the books. We didn't even get deep into the breathing cure for better sleep, which will be there as well.
Can I just mention, sorry Brian, to cut across you as well, like I brought out an app a few years ago because I wanted to kind of make an impact in putting the work out there about breathing, because I just felt that it comes with too much baggage and left to field connotations, and I totally understand why most people can be put off by breath work. It comes with all this baggage. Forget about the baggage. There's no baggage with breathing. It gives you tremendous tools in your way of life. Your ability to concentrate, your ability to focus, your ability to deal with stress, your ability to have better energy, to reduce breathlessness during physical exercise, to open up your airways. And I'm not overstating that. But I brought out an app. So here's a bit of a kind of a business thing where you can go wrong with apps. And I got a quote anyway for an app, and it was $30,000. And I said, okay, we'll go with that. And of course, it's never $30,000 with an app. And it creeped up. But already I'm in the door then. Sure, I can't pull out.
Some cost fallacy is a very real thing. Yeah, bad money after bad, or bad money after good.
That's the way it was. So the app ended up, the development cost was 100 grand, and the labor cost of our own staff working with it was 150K. And we said, okay, people said monetize it. No, so I'm not going to monetize it. It's out there for free. So everything is in there. So if people are thinking, well, how can I breathe through my nose because I have a stuffy nose? There's an exercise there to decongest the nose. There's breathing exercise for the office, for fitness, for asthma, for women, for sleep, for anxiety. It's all there. It's the most detailed breathing app in the market. It's called Oxygen Advantage. There's about 70,000 people are using it every day. Use it. It's free.
Amazing, Patrick. And just I also want to give a call to action for people, because there's so many different things we covered in today's podcast. I would imagine there's people listening and thinking, oh my God, my mom, my dad, my brother, my sister, they've got sleep apnea, they've got asthma, they've got issues with breathing, they have panic attacks, anxiety attacks. For those that are listening, please share the podcast with them. Just take a screenshot, pop it over. You can put it on your Instagram stories and tag it, or just share it in your WhatsApp, share it in your text message. There's so much here, and what we do with the podcast, as you know, is bring awareness to things that can improve people's lives. And breath work and breathing and everything we've touched on in today's podcast is just an introductory point, because people can follow on with the books you've written, the app, the content you create online. So Patrick, thank you so much for your time. I'm excited to talk a little bit more business based on what you just said there as well. So that'll be linked in the premium content for the circle. For those of you who want to join it for business coaching, will be in the description below. And yeah, Patrick, keep doing what you're doing, and thank you so much again.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Brian.
Becoming anxiety free, stop worrying and quieten your mind, always breathe correctly and sleep great with international breath expert Patrick McKeown. Great podcast. This is one that I'm going to go back on myself, because a lot of this information is still relatively new to me. Obviously, in the lead up to the podcast, I did quite a bit of research on Patrick, but a lot of things in real time were jumping out at me. So very excited to implement some of the tips and tricks that he gave in today's show. A reminder that today's podcast is sponsored by The Circle, where we have a premium episode that goes through the work-life balance myth, writing a best-selling book with a 6-figure advance and how he got that, and why curiosity leads to loving your job. That Circle is my group coaching business program. So if you want to join like-minded people in building a business that you don't want to retire from, getting the clarity, getting the accountability alongside me, leading it with other great businesses, check out the link in the description and the link to Everest Base Camp, my October 2026 trip. And I'm going to be using a lot of Patrick's tools and the mask that he gave me that I've actually linked up on my Instagram stories, Brian_Keane_fitness, in the training for Everest Base Camp next year. So the sale spaces at the time of recording for that trip, if you're listening to this at the time of release, the link is in the description below. Thanks so much for listening. Catch you next week.